We are in Bristol at the Engage 2024 conference. We are representing Emily's PhD project, and we're doing it in a slightly different way. Instead of having a big poster with bullet points, we have a scale and lots of bean bags that are tagged with ideas and concepts. So it was a really interesting way of talking about research, talking about the PhD project, and interacting with people who were here with their own projects and their own initiatives.
Hi, my name is Emily Ahmed. I am a co-production facilitator and public engagement worker, and I am doing a PhD in exploring experiences of co-production in health research. It's based at Warwick University. I've been collecting people's experiences and stories through interviews, so that's verbal interviews and creative methods interviews, asking people about their experiences of power, power dynamics, power sharing or not sharing, and what power means to people. So we've come today to the NCCPE Engage 2024 conference, and we brought a giant set of weighing scales, massive wooden weighing scales, and tons of beautifully coloured bean bags which we scattered all over the floor. And then these bean bags were each labelled with some of the things that I've heard from the public contributors in my interviews about what has impacted their experiences within co-production in relation to power. Some of the bean bags would say things like trust, informal conversations, or different ways that they might experience relationships with researchers or the project teams that they're working with, but also other things. So, for example, their previous lived experiences such as trauma or experiences of PTSD, or all the different kind of intersecting experiences that people might have, and then they bring those into that co-production space. So there's absolutely tons of these different beanbags and conversation starters, and we've used them to speak with people here at the conference today. So we invited people to look at the display, to pick up and to feel those beanbags, so tangible, that weight of what that beanbag means, and then to look at the label and to place it in the weighing scales. And the aim is to try and get some balance. So balance is a very difficult thing to get in co-production, but we've been working on it here today.
What I liked about this way of working is that it was really interactive, and you had the opportunity to kind of challenge people and ask them questions, but also learn from them and kind of be surprised by their reactions or their comments. So my first question is, what were your impressions of our little experiment, how you felt about it?
I really like conversation starters in terms of like a display, and this is one thing that you can physically engage with. It's tangible, you can see the imbalance of power, but it also starts a conversation about what that means in practice, because you have all of those words there that people said it's important, that are important for them.
I think it's really cool. It's a very interactive way. People are going to come over to see the bean bags, right? So it's a good way to get everybody talking, I think. And the fact that the scales don't seem to ever really balance is kind of poetic.
I thought it was a really good way of having a fun and tactile way of discussing lots of the different barriers that people face when they're taking part in patient involvement and co-production, like some of the problems that might come up. And I think it's a good prompt when you're considering like which of the barriers might be like the biggest thing or maybe the heaviest.
I think it's a really clever way to conceptualise and bring to life the kind of the idea of the imbalances that you get, and it's a nice way to get visual and hands-on with it. It's a very clever way to kind of make it a bit of a metaphor and do something hands-on so that you can think about it in a bit more of a tangible way and talk about it.
Yeah, it's cool. It's nice to throw in the bean bags and get physical and a bit of play. Yeah, it's good.
To ask is if you chose one particular little bean bag, and if you remember what it was and why you chose that one.
I chose emotional labor because I think it can be very difficult for people to constantly share their stories, and particularly when it comes to health, which is very personal. They're asked to do quite a lot outside of something that they may already struggle with. So it's important to acknowledge that and understand that they're giving a lot of themselves to the research project.
I picked up one relating to trust, because I think it's really important that when you're involved in these kind of co-production projects, that people on both sides kind of trust each other and are respectful of each other's views and understand kind of why, are able to kind of communicate why they're in these projects.
Chose decision making, collective decision making. That's what it was. Collective decision making. Yeah. It's obviously can get very tricky, like building consensus, getting into governance, who's got what power, which role. Basically, who's making a decision? Who has the power to make a decision?
I think one that stood out was the hierarchy one, I guess, because I think there's a lot of awareness of what roles people have versus what roles you have kind of in a space or around the table. But I think something like that that's quite playful kind of levels the hierarchy out sometimes. So if you're all doing the same activity and being quite playful or creative, it removes some of those hierarchies, I think.
Yeah. I chose a few, so there's quite the crowd, so I couldn't see all of them. I like intersectionality being there. I like being unheard. That was a good one.
When you hear the word power, what does it mean to you? And do you find it's got a more positive or negative connotation for you?
Probably negative, because I think of power imbalance, and I think of, I'm at the intersection of quite a few. I'm a female Muslim South Asian astrophysicist, so there was a lot of power imbalance in my life that I had to deal with, so I think negative connotation.
I think I always see it as a bit of a struggle, almost like a bit of a tug of war where people push on both sides and it always tips over to one side rather than the other. So the idea of equity, I think, while it's something that we all always try to achieve, is always quite hard to get. So it's always important to think of equity when we think of power, but it's also important to have an idea of where it balances.
I feel like there's still a long way to go for power to be shared equally. And I think it's really important that people have kind of equal power in relationships and projects. I think you have to be really upfront from the start about what everyone is looking to get out of this project, and then kind of work collaboratively to decide how you're going to do something, make sure everyone has a voice. And if you're working on a project with a team, then making sure everyone's on the same page and everyone feels able to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've had to get comfortable. I use it a lot for work. I had problems with it, but for the longest time now I've gotten over that. And I kind of see it as, what's the word? Like, it's a prerequisite. It's just a fundamental. Like, it's just, if you want to change the world, you need power. It's just what it is. And, I think we have to get comfortable with it, especially as communities and groups of people who are underrepresented and maybe feel like we lack power. We have to get comfortable with the word in order to build power. Yeah. That might involve taking some. That could involve taking some, but I would say we have a lot of power which we don't use because we're not engaged or not aware.
When I think of it, actually, I have quite negative associations with it, and I see it as something that's kind of inequitable and unfairly distributed. I think that's my first kind of initial thought around it. It's initially a negative thought, then you can frame it around kind of empowering and.
Well, it's just it's change. You want to change the world.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that I most enjoyed today was trying to think about and trying to explore different ways that we can use creative dissemination methods to share research. So it's not just about making sure that the research methods themselves and the data collection within that is creative and accessible, but also in thinking about how we disseminate that learning and how I share the stories that people have honoured and given to me to be able to think about all these different topics. And that's really important to me because I don't want this to just end up on a dusty report somewhere, and it will obviously be in a thesis and I'll share it through publications in lots of different ways, but this is just one way of testing how we can engage with people in a fun and creative way. And it was brilliant. People were really engaged. It really got people thinking, and it allowed people to engage as much or as little as they wanted. Some people just wanted to have a little look. Some people wanted to just choose a beanbag and place it. Some people wanted to have a bigger discussion. There was one person here that was a public contributor, so they came and they labelled one of the beanbags themselves. So it was a really great, really interactive session, and it's been really great being part of this. The NCCPE team have been amazingly supportive. They've really facilitated us being able to be here and to be able to make this encounter what it has been.